evenings. And I think it was not only because I sort of was interested in it, in the plot. I felt compelled at that time, this is mid-60s, most of what was being published by black men were very powerful, aggressive, revolutionary fiction or nonfiction. And also they had a very positive, racially uplifting rhetoric to go with it. All of which was stimulating, but some of which I, as an older person, thought, wait a minute. One of which was, you are my black queen, black is beautiful. And I thought, yeah, but why so loud? Then I thought, wait a minute, they're going to skip over something. And no one's going to remember that it wasn't always beautiful, you know.
Have you ever been told that you were being sensitive after someone made a mean joke about you? If you are, say, someone who experiences marginalization, have you ever been told that people like you are so sensitive? Have you ever felt the urge to prove them wrong, to be the difference, to be a pick-me for those with more privilege than you? Have you ever been told that you were ugly because of how you look? And did that stick with you? Did those insults come from other people who looked like you? Have you ever literally been perceived differently by the world because of how you look? Maybe that's a dumb question, because we're all perceived by people in some way, shape, or form. Due to how we are raised and conditioned in this society, we sometimes have knee-jerk reactions and assumptions when we meet someone who looks a certain way. They can be positive and they can be negative. The negative is what is referred to as lookism, which is discrimination against a person based on their appearance. We live in a strange, hypocritical society where we both loathe vanity, but also openly and sometimes proudly admit to hating people who are ugly or fat or even disabled. Online, people body shame other people regularly while also getting up on their high horses when they think someone has an eating disorder. We live in a world where we are both condoning and condemning lookism. We know it's bad on some level, we understand that it's mean, but we also still participate in it. And many people are not willing to unpack those kinds of biases, and on some level, why would they? Like I said, the cultural messages around beauty and inner beauty and vanity are so convoluted and confusing that I understand to some degree why a lot of people haven't gotten there yet. On the other hand, though, we live in a world where the voices of the most marginalized are not heard, even by people who are supposed to be on their side. If they are heard, sometimes they are dismissed or their concerns are minimized or mocked even. If they complain about the specific treatment they receive based on their appearance or racial identity, they will sometimes be told that they're being sensitive, that people aren't actually that bigoted, or maybe you just misread what they said. They probably didn't mean anything by it. I mean, I wasn't there and you were, but I'm going to assume that I am correct and that you're just being sensitive. Sensitive is a word that gets hurled at people pejoratively. It's not exactly a compliment to be called sensitive, which is dumb to me because everyone is sensitive. Everyone has their own sensitivities. If you think you don't, fuck out of my face, you are a liar.
You're a liar!
I've noticed that the main people who have a habit of calling people sensitive tend to be extremely sensitive people themselves. You see this with conservatives all the time. Somehow black people are the sensitive snowflakes who are justifiably angry about a racist jeans ad for a jeans company that sells ugly jeans, but when they had an aneurysm over the obese M&M, that was fine and normal and not at all snowflakey behavior. Sure, Susan. Or how they lose their shit if someone dares to say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. Conservatives are unhinged, and chronically online leftists are as well, but that's another video. Our sensitivities come from all kinds of places. Sometimes someone can say something that triggers a bad childhood memory of your sibling, or your sibling hits a nerve by outing a piece of sensitive information about your past. Sometimes it comes from bigotry. Being upset about two men kissing on screen is being sensitive. So being sensitive is not inherently good or bad, but it can be good, or it can be bad. And it's also inevitable. Growing up with a certain identity means you had a certain experience, one that maybe wasn't very pleasant. I grew up around a bunch of spoiled, racist, middle to upper class white kids, and I had to learn to develop a good poker face because I was so used to white people saying baffling shit to me. I knew not having a poker face would get me labeled aggressive, mean, or belligerent if I dared to assert myself. Belligerent. They love that one. The white people I was surrounded by were liberal conservatives, people who think they aren't racist, who say things like, I don't care if you're black, white, or purple. They were casually racist and would drop microaggressions left and right. I'd be lying if I said that it didn't make me a little sensitive when I received specific compliments from white people. I understand dog whistles to an extent, and when people comment things like, you're so articulate, I don't always know how to take that. Do white people get told that they're articulate? Maybe. I don't know, but what I do know is that for a lot of black and non-black people, someone who looks like me is sometimes expected to talk and be a certain way. People make up their minds about me and my attitude before even speaking to me or ever speaking to me. Because I don't smile all the time like a Barbie doll, I am often read as mean. When people do get to know me, they treat me as the exceptional black woman because I'm soft-spoken and quiet. Having to experience that daily is going to make a person a little sensitive. People sometimes will know that there is in fact a pretty fair reason for someone to be sensitive about something, but will shame them for it anyway or downplay it because they don't know how to exercise empathy. One of the best shaming tactics people use is to accuse said person of being insecure. The problem isn't the world, the problem is you. You need to change because the world sure as fuck isn't going to. Some of us are told that we aren't desirable. Some of us were taught to be disgusted with our own appearances, and some of us face varying levels of bullying and harassment because of our identity. I know Michael Jackson is problematic, but part of the reason Michael got so much cosmetic surgery was because his father was abusive and would insult his face and his nose all the time. This, of course, produced a deep insecurity in him that he would later try to fix. Someone who can't exercise empathy would probably say, well, what do you care what people think about you? Fuck the haters. Because even though we live in a world that conditions people to treat you this way and wants you to feel this way, somehow it is your fault. Not only is it your fault, but it's a character flaw. You're a lesser person if you have insecurities about your appearance or are still holding resentment for how you were treated because of your appearance. You should have at some point just let it go. Trauma isn't real. Get over it. Even if the people who made you feel the worst were your own family members, people you had no choice but to live with and endure this treatment from on a regular basis. Having a certain identity or experience doesn't exactly make you an expert on it, but it can mean that you can provide more insight and perspective to a situation than others who don't possess that identity can. Most people with enormous privilege understand that they have privilege even if it's just subconscious, but many of them pretend that they don't notice it or won't acknowledge how they benefit from it. And Feminism is for Everybody, Bell Hooks speaks about race and gender in one chapter and describes how white women in America are absolutely aware of their whiteness and what it means for them. She says, all white women in this nation know that their status is different from that of black women or women of color. They know this from the time they are little girls watching television and seeing only their images, and looking at magazines and seeing only their images. They know that the only reason non-whites are absent or invisible is because they are not white. All white women in this nation know that whiteness is a privileged category. The fact that white females may choose to repress or deny this knowledge does not mean they are ignorant. It means that they are in denial. And while I do think we all have some form of privilege that we genuinely might not be aware of because it's maybe not a form of privilege that is often spoken about, I'd argue most of us understand that we have privileges. You know because you understand that there are just certain things you don't have to deal with because of how you look or because you have an able body. You see how people who look different than you seem to deal with more struggles. If you watch media of any type, you notice the stereotypes or the way certain people's stories are reported on the news. Even if you can't name it, and even if no one's asked you to unpack this or acknowledge it out loud, you know on some level that you are privileged. So why then do these same people feel the urge to deny the experiences of people with less power and privilege than them? Why do these people confidently assert how they also experience hardships, and that their hardships are definitely the exact same? Why, when a very obvious form of bigotry is playing out on a famous, beloved black sitcom, do we continue to debate its existence over 30 years later? Why does the black community keep having the same arguments about colorism? And why can't we just call a spade a spade?
Offense to Sydney Sweeney, but like intersectionality and all these different things are relevant. It's like, yes, this woman is a Republican. She knows what she's doing, but the desire to like, for people to like fixate on Sydney Sweeney is like Sydney Sweeney's American Eagle. Sydney Sweeney is literally just the last bitch they called on this campaign. This idea, like she's the last person invited in. Okay, this campaign, this is about the company, the powers that be, the people behind there. Teams of people came up with this, decided this was the direction and with what reason and why, and they just got this gal at the last minute and put a face on it. So it's like, to me, people miss the bigger picture when they focus on Sydney Sweeney, and that's built in a bunch of different things for all of the aspects of, so like lookism, like, and pretty privilege and all these different things and beauty standards and all these things do contribute to people's unwillingness maybe to like see her for what it is. But it also, sexism and the downsides of this kind of like lookism is to then like hyperfixate on her, and it's about her. Meanwhile, that gal, you think that gal right that eye? Do you think she did the copyright or not? You think like no, so it's like she's just who they decided to make the face of it. And what I think is to me, what's interesting is like when you look at the point I'm making in my production about it is when you it's an ode. It's basically just an ode to what the beauty standard is, and that has always been, and what everybody is expected, what they treat as like the ideal beauty, and everybody tries to move towards it. But I always say is like lookism and beauty standards and all these things negatively impact everybody, including even the people who like appear to meet it. Because Sydney Sweeney isn't even a natural blonde, but it's a testament to what she feels the need to do to move towards what she knows is, you know what I mean, the most accepted, the standard, what's expected of. So that's why I think it's an interesting, it's one of those things. I'm like, what a good English class assignment. Like, you know what I mean? Like, hey, everybody, write an essay on this. What do you think about it? What elements did you point out? That's how I really see it. I'm just like, racist is racist, but in an interesting way.
So, my Gen X mom loves her some Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Growing up, my mom had like the first few seasons on DVD, and when we didn't have cable, which would happen from time to time because we were poor, we would whip out the old DVD collection. And my mom would play Fresh Prince from season 1 to whatever latest season she had, over and over and over and over and over again. I have seen so much Fresh Prince against my will. I've rarely ever gone out of my way to watch that show, but I have seen so many episodes of it back to back to back to back that many of the storylines and scenes and whatnot live rent-free in my brain. For the uninitiated who weren't forced to watch Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, the classic 90s sitcom is about Will Smith, using his real name, moving from West Philadelphia, born and raised, to stay with his rich and elitist Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv and their kids in Bel Air, California. Like with Beverly Hills 90210 or the Beverly Hillbillies, or to a small extent Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, this sitcom explores the fish out of water trope. A collision of morals, ethics, and expectations of decorum drive a lot of the conflict in the first season of Fresh Prince. Within the first few episodes, we learn that Uncle Phil grew up poor on a farm in South Carolina before becoming a judge. He had a very cliche and yet exceptional rags to riches story. Aunt Vivian, who studied at the same law school as Uncle Phil, which is where they met, got a PhD and went on to become a professor. Like Uncle Phil, Aunt Viv also faced a lot of hurdles before becoming a professor. And due to this, both parents obviously have very high expectations of their children. Hillary, Carlton, and Ashley. Throughout the beginning of the series, we see Uncle Phil, the patriarch of the home, constantly yelling at his children, berating them, threatening them, and sometimes being physically abusive towards them. Because he just wants the best for his children and because he worked so hard to get where he is now, this is usually framed as a joke. Uncle Phil and Will butt heads a lot in the beginning, but there are moments between them that show Phil being the father that Will never had. It's the same with Carlton. They also start off rough, with Will constantly lobbing short jokes and fat jokes at them as their relationships, as well as Will the character grows and matures. The story itself is based, emphasis on based. It is based on the life of a man named Benny Medina, who went on to become a Hollywood producer and writer and has managed celebrities like Jennifer Lopez. Benny Medina, of course, is a black man and really did stay with a rich family when he was a teenager. Only difference being they were white, and during the development of the series, they felt the premise should include a rich black family instead of a white one. This way, the show wouldn't just tackle classism, but also anti-blackness among upper-class black people. Even though the show tackled these issues and sometimes well, at least for the time, the show upheld this very conservative, pull yourself up by your bootstraps narrative. And at times, a lot of times, could be quite classist. Even so, it doesn't bother me a whole lot because the show is very camp at times and sometimes a bit obnoxious, but I've always loved a sitcom that is funny and extremely dramatic and moving at the same time. But we wouldn't be here if there wasn't something for me to bitch about, right? Breaking the fourth wall is also another thing the show is famous for, which works fine because this is before that became a tired trope in the 2010s. One of the most famous fourth wall breaking lines, I would argue, would come from Will's best friend Jazz, who is best known for the getting thrown out of the house and doing a funny scream gag. It's season 4. Aunt Viv and Uncle Phil have just had another baby, and Jazz remarks to Aunt Viv, "Ever since you had that baby, there's something different about you." Audience erupts in laughter, and Will Smith gives the camera a look. Most people now are aware of the disappointing recasting of Aunt Viv. It's probably one of the most, if not the most, famous recastings in sitcom history. I don't have the numbers on that, but I just assume most people know. You don't even have to watch the show to know that. It's like with the finale to The Sopranos. You know how it's going to end, therefore you appreciate it more than viewers did at the time when they mistakenly thought their cable cut out. There's nothing I appreciate about the Aunt Viv recast, though. It's one of those recasts where if you're binge watching the series from beginning to end, you are dreading that point in the show where she is replaced. I saw a Reddit post in the sitcom subreddit from a few months ago, saying they disagreed with the popular, I assume, fandom opinion that the show tanked after Janet Hubert left. They said that actually the show got better, that Aunt Viv's drastic change didn't have an impact, and the seasons of Fresh Prince post Janet Hubert's exit are some of the most memorable and well-written episodes. They did note that Janet was the better actress. I don't disagree in the sense that the show did not immediately take a nosedive and that it did still have many great episodes. But to say her absence wasn't felt is just bullshit. Originally, Aunt Viv was played by Janet Hubert, a dark-skinned black woman, and when she was replaced due to reasons, Daphne Maxwell Reid, a shorter and much lighter-skinned actress, came in. Most Fresh Prince fans miss the old Aunt Viv. I always missed her during my mom's rewatches. Before, Aunt Viv was a much more lively and confident character. She was funnier and she also had a career. Most of us who are fans of her remember the classic episode where she turns 40, has a midlife crisis, and performs an intense choreographed dance at a dance class before fainting right after. And to be clear, I don't hate Daphne Maxwell Reid because she's light-skinned. I just have a problem with her being cast to play Aunt Viv in the first place. Usually when a character gets replaced on a TV show, they typically try to replace them with someone who looks like them, especially if that character was very prominent. Darren from Bewitched, Greg from Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Reggie from Riverdale. So why wouldn't they cast someone who at least resembles her in skin tone? Not only is Aunt Viv's change colorist, it's also sexist. In her wiki page, they describe it as Aunt Viv being reimagined as a housewife. A boring housewife. A Stepford wife, more like. Actually, a Stepford wife would be more interesting than this version of Aunt Viv. I like to think this was more on the writers and not the actress, but the new Aunt Viv was dry as fuck. It almost felt like the showrunners were trying to stick it to Janet Hubert by completely diluting a very well-liked and memorable character. Whenever an actor replaces a character that has been on a series for a while, there are going to be changes. This is a different actor, and for viewers who are used to the original actor, it's a bit weird and uncanny watching someone different play a character you formed a bond with. And while it is obviously for laughs, it doesn't always help when the shows break the fourth wall and call attention to it. It just kind of reminds you that this is not the original actor, and unless the actor manages to stand out and make the character their own, that's always going to be a glaring detail in any scene this person performs in. Which sometimes kind of sucks for that actor, who might have some big shoes to fill. With Daryl from Bewitched, he went from being an annoying, controlling husband who could sometimes be sweet and funny to a pissed off, controlling husband who could sometimes be sweet and not funny. Like with Daphne, Dick Sargent just wasn't fun to watch. He was kind of dry and it didn't feel the same. It didn't feel right. But at least I didn't have to feel bad while watching it. Dark-skinned black women getting replaced by light-skinned actresses is not unique to Fresh Prince. Harriet from Family Matters was replaced towards the end of the series with a light-skinned actress. The original Claire from My Wife and Kids was dark-skinned and was replaced by a light-skinned, curly-haired actress. As with Aunt Viv, this change was accompanied by a drastic change in personality.
Campbell. The oldest daughter is Claire. She was originally played by Jazz Raycole. And if y'all watch my Hey Arnold She Fast video, I'm pretty sure that was Chloe's voice actor. Hey y'all, so editing me right here. I do think it's important for me to put this in here. Mind you that this is alleged, so I'm not sure if this is true, but this is the reason why I always heard why Claire was no longer played by Jazz. And that had to do with Jazz's mother not liking one of the storylines in the show that had to do with Claire's character. Because in this episode, Claire has a friend, this is season 2, she has a friend that ends up pregnant, and I remember because this friend was played by Raven Simone, but also Jazz herself had stated, I'm not sure where she stated this information, but it is said that they wanted somebody to be a little bit older to play Claire. And Claire, the original Claire, played by Jazz Raycole, she is the only dark-skinned member of the family. We can say that her recasting was colorist. It was also a bit texturist too, just as well, but she was recasted by Jennifer Freeman. Jennifer Freeman and Jazz Raycole look completely different. And also Jennifer Freeman, she is best known for My Wife and Kids, but another movie that a lot of people are familiar with her being in was You Got Served, which is not good. People who You Got Served is a hot ass mess, okay? Just give me Roll Bounce. I'd rather watch Roll Bounce. Much better movie. Now, we do need to talk about Jennifer Freeman's casting and why I personally think it is problematic. First, Damian Wayans and Tisha Campbell, not Tisha Campbell. Yeah, that is Tisha Campbell. I was about to say Tashina Arnold. They both play Gina and Pam together, and they usually kind of get casted. A lot of people are familiar with them one another. Let's go ahead and get the issues with Claire's recasting out the way. Because, like I said, My Wife and Kids is supposed to be a black sitcom about a black ass family. This My Wife and Kids, unfortunately, is not the only black sitcom that has done this, because I've even talked about this in the past before on talking about Casey Undercover, when it's supposed to be a show about a black family, but the mother and daughter of that series were both played by biracial actors. Yeah, Jennifer Freeman is biracial, and like we can tell. Okay. Claire in the first season, like, you know, Claire when she was dark skinned versus light skinned Claire, it feels like two completely different characters.
The 90s seemed to be the golden era for dark-skinned black women in the media, and it feels like the recasting of all of these actresses as completely different people was possibly the canary in the coal mine for what was to come with the rapid colorism in the entertainment industry. Light-skinned biracial girls with curly hair became the default for black girl representation, especially in teen media. When dark-skinned black girls and women are present, it's almost always in a plotline about tragedy and hardship and abuse. The Color Purple, for example. Most of the cast was dark-skinned in the original film, which I do appreciate. Even if I understand that those are the main stories, you will see black women who look like me. And it is part of why the 2023 remake of The Color Purple was a little disappointing. It lightens at least half their cast, a major change from the original Spielberg cast. And considering the first adaptation was directed by a white man, and the remake a black man, it's just kind of frustrating, but reminds you how colorism can be perpetuated by black people themselves. It shows the ways a lot of people in our community fail to understand why such representation was important to some of us, and important for the story. The Color Purple tells the story of Celie, a queer black woman living in the South during the early 20th century. We follow her from childhood to adulthood as she endures severe physical, emotional, and sexual abuse by her own father, who impregnates her with multiple children and eventually marries her off to Mr., who would take his place as her abuser. Celie's younger sister Nettie comes to stay with them, and Mr. tries to sexually assault her at one point, but she fights him off and runs away. This pisses off Mr., and so he throws her out of the house, devastating both women who vow to write to each other. The rest of the story follows this very tumultuous and abusive marriage, as Celie also attempts to find and reunite with her sister. What was clear to me when I was younger watching the film but didn't have the words to explain it was that both Nettie and Celie are dark-skinned, but the movie hints at which one of them we are supposed to find more attractive. Mr. takes more of a liking to Nettie than to Celie. Either way, he's a gross predator, to be clear. But what I'm trying to say is that Nettie is seen as more attractive than Celie because of featureism. Something else we as a society don't want to think about. How even if you are technically someone who would be considered ugly by society's standards, you can still benefit from having Eurocentric features. It doesn't come up very often, but occasionally you will see a thin, dark-skinned black woman with curly hair, a small narrow nose, and an asymmetrical face in a cast that is mostly white. Due to this, she is more likely to not be portrayed as stereotypically as dark-skinned black women with different features. That is a more challenging narrative than just a light-skinned actress playing her in the remake. I understand why they did it, and I also don't think the filmmakers were being intentionally colorist, but I wouldn't be surprised. I think they clearly wanted some big-name actors, and not a ton of dark-skinned black women are big-name actors. There are still a lot of dark-skinned black actors in the movie, and so it's much more diverse in that way, I suppose. And the original Color Purple was not perfect. There's still some colorist shit happening, especially with Sophia and Squeak, I think her name is. She's literally smaller than her, has a higher pitched voice, lighter than her, and Sophia is shown to be more violent and aggressive than Squeak is. It's just, dark-skinned black women have been rapidly disappearing from mainstream media. Like, colorism is worse than it was in the 90s, so to remake The Color Purple and lighten half the cast just feels like a bummer because of what is already happening. If colorism wasn't such an issue, I probably wouldn't even be complaining about this. And if it didn't obviously appear to almost always be a gender issue, I wouldn't be complaining as much. But alas, when I say The Color Purple remake lightened half its cast, I mean the women, because all the men appear to still be dark-skinned. Or at least most of them. I've only seen the movie once. I didn't really like it, if I'm being honest. And this could have been a coinkydink. It maybe wasn't intentionally malicious, but it was still a choice. And one that is particularly noticeable among dark-skinned black women like me. There seems to be a pattern of dark-skinned black women being seen as disposable and easily replaceable with someone who looks nothing like them. If we get to stick around, we're put into boxes and are limited in the kind of roles we play. Undesirable, mean, bossy, no-nonsense, angry, or even funny. Y'all know I love Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, but Dr. Akopian, as iconic as she is a somewhat stereotypical, no-nonsense black woman. The stereotype isn't that terrible here, like it's not the most egregious at all, trust me. So it doesn't bother me a whole lot, but it's still there. A few months ago, I was rewatching Friday with a friend, and I was telling her how Friday subverts the light-skinned, dark-skinned trope by having the dark-skinned girl, played by Nia Long, be the desirable love interest, who was also shy and sweet, and Craig's light-skinned girlfriend as loud and jealous. I'm not trying to say having a light-skinned actress act stereotypically is necessarily better or less offensive or less racist, but it's just kind of a nice subversion. Kinda. Like a shocking one that I never picked up on when I was younger, even though I've seen Friday like a million, jillion, trillion times. I could recite the entire script to you just from memory now.
Who the fuck you go to the show with last night?
I didn't go to the show last night.
You ain't got to lie, Craig. You ain't got to lie.
Going back to the gender issue, FD Signifier did a video on his B-Sides channel where he discussed the double standard around colorism in Hollywood. As much as dark-skinned black women have been disappearing, dark-skinned black men haven't seen that much of a shortage on their end. We can discuss the ways light-skinned black men are written versus dark-skinned black men, because there is something there to discuss, but dark-skinned black men get plenty more opportunities to star in popular mainstream shows and movies than dark-skinned black women. They get much more complexity and range. You're more likely to see a dark-skinned black male nerd character than a dark-skinned black girl nerd. And notice how their characters are almost always paired up with a light-skinned black woman or a white woman or just a non-black woman in general.
Colorism is a thing, featureism is a thing, light-skinned privilege is a thing, and that is across gender lines. It is still a thing. However, all right, stick with me for a second. In many ways, colorism works differently for black men in America. Basically, the tools and capacities for how black men can access white masculinity is a different tool bag than how black women need to try to access white femininity. The way that black men are able to navigate and maneuver trying to access white masculinity is just not as possible for black women trying to navigate and access white femininity. It's not saying that black men are equal to white men or that black men are the white people of black people and stuff that I know is going to trigger a handful of certain type of Negroes in my audience. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the gaps there and the way we travail those gaps don't work exactly the same. And thus, the face of the colorism discussion is often a dark-skinned black woman's face because they're leading that discussion, and for good reason, because colorism affects them the most and the worst. So a lot of the ways that colorism affects black men is exactly the same as the way it affects black women. Lighter-skinned black men are considered smarter, less criminal. They get better opportunities in education and in professional arenas, and they're more likely to receive lighter sentences when charged with crimes. Again, this is all research-based. I'm not putting that shit in the description. Just fucking Google it. There's a history here. There's a reason why the brown paper bag test is a thing. Again, Google that. But that's a thing where black people of all genders were barred from certain cultural or social groups if they were any darker than a brown paper bag. There's a reason why so many historical black figures throughout American history are lighter skinned, possibly even biracial, and this includes black men: Du Bois, Charles Drew, Thurgood Marshall. If I bother to Google, you go down the line and look at first black person to do blank, like a disproportionate amount of those first are going to be lighter skinned black people, especially the men. By virtue of white supremacy, black people with a closer proximity to whiteness have just had more access to resources and less barriers to success. This is just historical facts.
Sometimes there will be a light-skinned woman and a dark-skinned woman, and both will be represented in a specific, sometimes stereotypical way. Take Monica and Shawnee from Love and Basketball. Shawnee, played by the gorgeous Gabrielle Union, is an unfriendly black hottie stereotype. She's really mean, and I guess also a slut, a trope that she would replay later on in the classic black rom-com to complete that game, which also has some light-skinned, dark-skinned shit happening with Vivica Fox's character, who isn't like super duper light, but she is lighter than Gabrielle, and that shows up in how they're written. Not to keep clarifying everything I say, but I'm also not trying to say any negative depiction of dark-skinned black women is inherently bad or is inherently colorist, but it's just typical and predictable to see them portrayed in very specific ways that tend to be limiting. Even if they get to play the lead in a big NBC show, they're completely desexualized. Light-skinned black women are sometimes written in the same ways white, thin, blonde women are written in movies and shows with predominantly white casts. They are seen as more fun or sluttier and more desirable and also dumb. Sometimes they're seen as classier, more polite or sweet and delicate.
Papa! Who this woman?
Think The Proud Family with Penny versus Dejanay and the Gross Sisters. You see this with Lauren London, Tiana Taylor, and the late Natalie Desselle in Medea's Big Happy Family. The black women who are dark are mean, borderline abusive, loud, and annoying. Oh, let me not forget, also emasculating to their black male partners. Always.
Happy anniversary, baby.
You think I want some flowers you just picked up on the side of the road? Ain't no thought put into that, Harold. Happy anniversary. Why would I want to spend an anniversary with you? There's nothing happy about the years we've been together.
Tammy, I'm trying.
Yeah, I'm trying too. I'm trying to get the hell away from you. And why'd you leave those dishes in the sink there before you left?
What? I didn't leave no plates.
And you told our sons that I nag too much?
Tammy.
Shut up, I'm talking.
But
I don't know why in the hell, after I go to work all day, I gotta come home and clean up after you.
Tammy, you need to have these boys help you clean up around here.
Didn't I tell you I was talking? Okay? What is wrong with you?
So why does this happen? Why are dark-skinned black women portrayed this way? Well, darkness has always in some way been connected to something bad or sinister. We are meant to be scared of darkness, whether literal or metaphorical. It's why dark-skinned black men are seen as more dangerous or violent or aggressive. So darkness is seen as masculine and scary. Couple that with the fact that black women have never been viewed as real women. This means that dark-skinned black women will typically get the shit end of the stick when it comes to our treatment on screen. Dark-skinned black women are sometimes punished more harshly by the plot. Me and my friend, same friend from earlier, were watching The Vampire Diaries recently, and my friend who was darker than me was like, you know, Bonnie isn't even that dark. Can you imagine how much worse she would have been treated by the show if she was our color? That's something I always think about when I see a light-skinned black person, particularly a woman, being dragged through the mud. Dark-skinned black women are not allowed to be the lead in a lead rom-com where we get to play an awkward, quirky weirdo or something. We're not allowed to have light and fun comedic stories that hit mainstream theaters. We're not even allowed to be the lead star in a mainstream thought-provoking drama that deals with things like abuse or infidelity or obsession unless it's produced by Tyler Perry, which means it will be limited to misogynistic, Christian, conservative narratives.
Writing a dissertation. Shut up and just listen to what I'm actually saying now. When we come to the media, in American media specifically, lighter-skinned black men were more visible than darker-skinned black men for a long time, but it wasn't always like that, nor has it stayed like that. And when we come back to desirability, specifically for black men, there is a specific fetishization for darker skin and the way that dark skin is desired in black men, not in a necessarily good way, but a flattering way per se, that is still very harmful because it's flattering. Black men tend to play into it and black women tend to participate in it. And we even Blazer in Hollywood, he was the first black leading man. And part of the reason was that he was, one, very dark and presented very masculine and traditional, but he also very purposefully presented that masculinity in an idealized, safe, and acceptable way. No one would ever mistake Portier for a brute because of the way he presented himself and the way he spoke. And so in that regard, he was the best of both worlds. He got to be, in many ways, that fetishized ideal of the dark-skinned black men, but also acceptable and able to integrate into, civil society. And part of that was because the types of roles that Portier played would never allow him to behave in any way that was not acceptable. Portier's characters helped create the concept of the acceptable Negro or the magical Negro. He never really was about black issues, at least on screen. He never really appeared with other black actors, especially black women, and definitely not white women, which wasn't the case for him in real life. So in that regard, he helped unearth this new image of black masculinity that became the pristine top image of what was desirable for black men. Now, this didn't immediately become the standard in Hollywood. In the 80s, we still had Mario Van Peebles and Prince and Billy D. Williams. But by the time Wesley Snipes pops up in the 90s, light-skinned leading men in Hollywood basically become extinct. Right now, think to yourself, from the 90s until now, who are the black leading men in Hollywood? Are any of them light-skinned? Pretty much none of them. All you have is Will Smith, who's, depending on how you imagine lighter skin, barely counts. The Rock, who barely counts as black. Vin Diesel, who doesn't even identify as black. If you're thinking about black leading men, you're thinking Denzel, Wesley Snipes, Don Cheadle, Samuel L. Jackson, Chadwick Boseman, and so on. That is what Hollywood has branded as the leading black men for most of the last 3 or 4 decades. As darker skinned black women can very legitimately and with a ton of proof show that they're being marginalized and invisibilized in American media, I don't think darker skinned black men can feel the same. They just can't. Things aren't perfect for us, right? There's still a lot to critique about the depiction of black men in our media. But if you were to say there was a huge variety for black male images for darker skinned black men right now, you'd be correct. You want a sensitive family man? Get Sterling K. Brown. You want nerds? Pick the 1 billion dark skinned black nerds from the last 20 years. You want superheroes? You got that. You want queer black men? You even have that. If you're complaining about being erased as a black man because of this one particular incident, I ain't with you on that. I'm just not. Feel free to correct me. Let me know. Drop some data in the comment section about how I'm wrong. I don't see it. Now,
I should say now that colorism is not just a problem within the black community. It exists in many different communities all over the world. I am mostly speaking about this from my own experiences and knowledge about colorism in my community. Colorism is harmful for anyone of any gender. Black men, unlike black women, are heavily fetishized in pornography. A lot of interracial porn is just muscular, tall, dark-skinned black men with big dicks having sex with tiny, size 0 white women. And being fetishized in this way doesn't mean you are not also being dehumanized, but it does highlight how we view certain people who are dark-skinned. Fresh Prince, a show that purportedly tried to tackle anti-blackness, invoked anti-blackness with the replacement of Aunt Viv. White people, like the Borowitz and Fresh Prince, very much perpetuate colorism, but it always stings a little more when it's coming from your own people. And it frankly makes my blood boil when I continue to see the same woefully ignorant takes from not just black people generally, but many light-skinned black people when it comes to this conversation.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
If you're a fat person, if you grew up fat and have been fat your whole life, more than likely you have experienced trying to discuss the fat shaming that has been lobbied in your direction at some point in your life to someone who isn't and has probably never been fat. Like many marginalized people, you know what it's like to be told that what you are experiencing is not unique to you. Now, they don't actually need to think about what you've said because they've been through it too, so what makes you so special? We've all either done this or experienced this or both, and we all know that it sucks. I hope. Men do this to women, parents do this to children, white people do this to black people, and skinny people do this to fat people all the time. Fat people will try to create a space where they can discuss the anti-fat bias that they experience, only for a thin person to come in, try and co-opt the space so that everyone's body shaming can be focused on, or so they can just tell fat people to shut up because what makes them so special. Nearly 3 summers ago now, I released what would be my first long-form, thoroughly researched deep dive. It was called The Classic Tradition of Thin White Women Faking Their Fat. There were various other titles I tried out before just leaving it at that. At most, when I first posted it, it got up to 700 views, and that was over a long period of time. Then I did my video about something borrowed 2 years later, and for some reason everyone just flocked to that video. And it started raking up a bunch of views. It was kind of shocking because the audio in that video was not great in the beginning mainly. My recap of I Feel Pretty is too long and not super interesting. I should have cut that way down. However, if we ignore that, I do think it's one of my best videos. I was proud of it because I was able to speak about something that I had been thinking about for so long, especially in regards to Amy Schumer. For those of you who maybe have not seen the video, in summation, the video is about me critiquing the message of I Feel Pretty, a movie that came out in 2018 starring Amy Schumer as a fat-coded character who hits her head and suddenly thinks she's conventionally attractive. I pointed out how the film deliberately puts Amy Schumer, at the time a thin person, next to extremely thin actresses and models to make her look bigger by comparison, despite clearly having abs. After talking about the movie, I talked about the popularization of the hero-in-chief body type and how that set an impossibly high standard of beauty for women and femmes, where anyone who was not a size 0 was deemed as a fat person. If you had big boobs, a big butt, hips, thick thighs, or if you were literally just a size 6. My main point was that the thin obsessed society we live in is so toxic and deranged that we were inducing body dysmorphia into young girls. Think about the ways people fat shamed Britney Spears at the VMAs. She is visibly thin, but because her stomach wasn't as flat as it usually was, I guess, that meant she was just so fat, and people were being so incredibly cruel about it. Mind you, this is also the same society that, especially at the time, mocked women who had eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia by portraying them in movies as dumb, vain, self-absorbed, shallow bitches addicted to laxatives. And at the same time, body shaming Kate Winslet in the Titanic and saying she was fat as if we didn't see her naked body with our own 2 eyes when Jack was drawing her. Or writing Bridget Jones as a fat person at 130 pounds. I even remember, because I was rewatching Bring It On recently, a classic film that is way better than I remembered, but one of the cheerleaders has a big butt. Not even that big, but kind of big, and even though she is clearly skinny, we're supposed to think she's fat, and Sparky Pilastry's fuck ass compliments her before unsubtly looking at her ass and is like, report those compliments to your ass before it gets so big it forms its own website. The video was also about the ways straight-sized to mid-sized actresses during the 2010s were seen as representing the average woman, even though the average American woman is plus size, and a lot of those women were not. Their body types were seen as the acceptable version of fatness because they weren't too fat or too skinny. My point in even talking about that was to point to the ways fat people who are actually plus size and experience systemic oppression are completely ignored and dismissed in these conversations, because even people who are mid-size or straight size and might advocate for body positivity will be fatphobic towards people who are fatter than them. I'm not trying to generalize, but I have met many of them. They exist. I'm technically mid-sized at this point myself, and I don't usually identify as mid-sized because a lot of unchecked fatphobia over there, I'll just say. I brought up Rachel Hollis, who had a whole speech about her new mom body where she shared this Instagram post she made about loving her postpartum body. Stretch marks and all. But as you can see in the photos, she is still thin. She just has some extra skin on her stomach because she had a baby. She literally has a thigh gap and I'm sorry, but if you are one of those you can only be happy about your stretch marks or your fat belly if you had a baby people, I don't really trust whether or not you are unpacking any anti-fat beliefs that you have. Rachel wants to be celebrated and uplifted because her stretch marks are physical evidence of her strength as a mother. I don't think that is inherently evil or wrong for her to feel that way, and I'm stealing this point from Aubrey Gordon, but what about people who didn't have a baby? Do you think their bodies deserve to be celebrated as well? I'm sure some moms who say stuff like this do think so, but sadly and usually people who say that tend to be just as extremely anti-fat as everyone else. My mom being a prime example. She would body shame fat people who were young and childless. And if either me or my sister would say, well, we're all fat, my mom would make sure to remind us that she had 3 kids, so what's their excuse? That's just how some people who are not plus size or even on the fattest end of the spectrum are. They are only body positive when it comes to bodies that resemble theirs. The reason a lot of fat people roll their eyes at thin people who try to make body positive songs or try to be body positive with their platform is because they usually aren't actually that inclusive of other body types. Look at Meghan Trainor's All About That Bass music video. It's a body positive song, but there's only one actual fat person and he's only there as a joke. What this is and what I failed to mention in that video was that this was a form of thin privilege. Because even if you are not skinny or you feel fat, you still have proximity to thinness. And as Uncle Ben once said, with great proximity comes great advantages. Maybe it was something else. Something that has become clear to me now doing YouTube for a few years is that most people who comment on these video essays, long or short, don't actually watch the videos they get the inquiries at. They either react solely to the title or they watch like 10 to 15 minutes of a video that's close to an hour long, sometimes less, and start accusing you of saying things that you didn't say. It's always obvious when a negative commenter hasn't watched your video, like, always. My Norbit video was another one where most of the people who got mad at me were mostly reacting to the title or were deliberately misconstruing my words. On the I Feel Pretty video, I got mostly positive comments. Though it is one of my most contentious comment sections, most of you understood what I was trying to say. But there was still a decent amount of you who didn't. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about this take. I was a skinny girl until puberty when I gained huge boobs and a stomach. I wasn't fat in the way you seem to be describing fat, but people treated me like I was fat. For instance, when I was pregnant at 25 with my first child at perhaps 150 pounds, I had an OBGYN, himself an older white objectively fat by your definition man, tell me upon reviewing my glucose numbers for gestational diabetes that we both know this isn't a gestational diabetes problem. It's an eating problem. I get that what I've experienced isn't to the degree that heavier people have felt, but I don't see how it is helpful to shame me for feeling fat when people are telling me I'm fat and that I should be ashamed of my weight. That's how people treat me sometimes. It seems pretty human to feel some sort of way about my body because of how I'm treated. Lord. So in the video, after I recap I Feel Pretty and briefly discuss fat coding in the media, there is a section titled Fat at Any Size, where I talked about thin female celebrities who were cruelly fat shamed in the media from film to TV to tabloids. I was acknowledging that anyone can experience fat shaming regardless of their size, hence the title of that chapter. I never implied once that you can't feel insecure about your body even if you are not a fat person. That would be an incredibly ignorant and idiotic thing to say. I was making a point about how white supremacy has a very low threshold for what it considers to be fat, and how fat shaming is used to take down successful women regardless of their actual size. But this person and others do the very thing I talked about in the video, which was internalized dominance in the way smaller fat to mid-sized to thin people center themselves in conversations around fat shaming and dismiss the unique experiences of people fatter than them and presume that it's their experience actually that's not being acknowledged, even though I did acknowledge it. Here's another one. I'm with most of this commentary, but calling these women thin isn't accurate either. Some of them are genuinely slim. Some always say are average or something along those lines, but calling them skinny or thin just to prove the opposite point is still a misrepresentation. Which is just crazy, because I was talking about women who were thin and themselves stated as being between a size 6 and an 8. Plus, I'm pretty sure I also said straight size. I wasn't implying anyone who isn't plus size is skinny. That's not what I said. I'm 63. lot of pressure to be thin until I was in my 50s. I gained weight, just 30 pounds, but now lost 20 with 10 to go. Now I need to be thin due to less weight on my knees, not due to pressure. Now it is not society pressure, but pressure on the knees. Everyone should weigh what they feel is right for themselves. But the knees are no laughing matter. Friends my age and older have knee issues. That are heavier, but less weight can ease the discomfort to maybe avoid knee surgery or prolonged surgery. What a weird comment. It's like they were trying to justify their weight loss to me by saying it's hard on the knees over and over again. Like, okay, cool. The young age of this creator really shows. They have no idea how many people used to speak openly about how fat and disgusting all of these women were, supposedly. Just because this creator sees these women as thin, that doesn't mean that they weren't or aren't treated like they're fat. They used to post screenshots of Lena Dunham naked in the show Girls, censored, to Reddit and make fun of her for being fat. I clearly remember those days. These Gen Zers weren't there. They have no idea what the culture was like at the time. But growing up mid-size is awful. Bullying non-stop. Mid-sized women who find comfort in body positivity aren't stealing some movement. That's insane. Why the obsession over owning a movement designed to help women? What the fuck? Being in the Amy Schumer, Demi Lovato weight range can be as difficult, and seeing these people say it's okay was a huge thing for my self-esteem as a mid-sized girl growing up. So part of the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I still occasionally get comments on this video, and the latest one was what made me be like, okay, I want to vent about this because it's really annoying to me. First off, to that comment saying that my age is showing is funny because their stupidity is showing. You clearly didn't watch the video because I talked about how certain actresses who aren't even plus size will be treated as though they are extremely fat in Hollywood, and I also specifically discussed Lena Dunham. Dumbass. And then saying these Gen Zers weren't there so they don't get it just really irked me because I swear some millennials act like they are the only generation that grew up during the early 2000s. I was born in 98. I also grew up during that time and remember a lot of the things I discussed in that video. That's why I discussed it and why I even made that video to begin with. There are older Gen Zers who grew up during the early 2000s. That was also our childhood and our era. Also, society has never stopped being fatphobic, so saying Gen Z just wouldn't understand is so fucking annoying. Like, why do y'all keep acting like body positivity put an end to fatphobia? It didn't. People were just as obsessed with thinness as they were at any other time. Fatphobia and thin supremacy is not unique among millennials and Gen X. My generation was exposed to just as much fatphobic, toxic diet culture bullshit as previous generations. The conversations around these issues might be a little different, but that doesn't mean we don't understand the obsession with thinness. Like, please, children understand that before they even learn how to read. The last two comments are reminiscent of a very recent comment I got under this video. Being tall, people often can't tell how much weight you gain, especially if your arms and legs still seem thin. I was a size 4, went up 1 from muscle, then gained 35 pounds in 6 months. Best believe I felt fat. If you suddenly have back rolls and a hanging belly, you are gonna feel fat even if you weren't a 1X or higher. It's annoying how many people try to act like you're crazy or dysmorphic because you still conventionally pretty and don't see what you look like naked. You think you are doing them a favor by negating their feelings, but you really aren't. I literally have to hide wanting to lose 25 pounds because people still think I'm a size medium and think I'm anorexic. Side note, but we do need to have a conversation about people who have lost weight or are trying to lose weight constantly acting like they're in a press group, but that's another video. And then they left another comment saying, also, why is being fat gatekeeped here? Oppression Olympics, whether with size or skin color, are not helpful. Is every woman under a size 16 somehow thin? Should someone who gains a significant amount of weight quickly not worry because they aren't a 1X yet? I mean, seriously. Regardless of being thin, average, mid, or plus size, society will treat you like shit if your abdomen is way larger than expected for your body type. Skinny fat is a thing, and someone a size small with a 30-inch waist will attract way more negative attention than a size 1X with a 40-inch waist. Not true. No one expects a non-fat person to have rolls and a hanging gut or panis outside of pregnancy or postpartum. Even body positive ads with women's sizes 18 to 20 still heavily airbrush bellies and choose women with larger breasts to give the appearance of an hourglass figure with a proportionally slim waist. Coke bottle bodies of all sizes are celebrated. I don't really understand the end of this comment. It seems like they're both trying to point out the hypocrisy of those Dove ads and also saying that women who look like that also deserve representation. Because if you dare try and tell people how they benefit from thin privilege, that means I am saying they don't have any problems in the world and live amazing body insecurity-free lives. This happens with anyone who is forced to confront their own privilege. They get defensive instead of reflective and go out of their way to put an end to this conversation because it personally offends them. It's unfortunate because I think if these people actually watched the video all the way through, they would have understood what I was trying to say. The thing is, the reason we took this detour is because colorism and fatphobia have a lot of parallels. A large number of light-skinned black people and mid-sized to thin people have very similar defensive responses to this discourse. They can be exclusionary in familiar ways, and many are equally in denial of their light-skinned privilege. For example, whenever the conversation around fat shaming comes up, thin people swoop in to talk about skinny shaming and how thin people face prejudicial assumptions and body policing as well. There are people who insist that being underweight is just as bad as being overweight because they desperately want to take away the uniqueness of fat people's experiences so bad that they essentially imply that being fat and skinny are the exact same. Light-skinned black people do the same shit. They say, well, we're black too when we also experience racism and prejudice. This doesn't infuriate me because I don't believe that that is true. I know it's true. Having a body, especially if you're a woman, means you definitely face some body shaming at some point in your life. We have all been called fat, whether we actually were or not. When it comes to racism, the same is also true. Need look no further than Cassie or Meghan Markle. We still live in a fucked up racist society. Of course you still experience racism. But we're not just talking about racism here, are we? In the same way, we aren't just talking about body shaming. Body shaming is always wrong no matter what body is being shamed, and I do think there are various forms of body shaming that are normalized in our society and are left uncriticized, but acting like being skinny and being called Big Bird or being told to eat a sandwich in a thin obsessed society is the same thing as being a fat person in an anti-fat society. Experiencing intense body shaming from your peers to your friends to your parents to your doctors, or being encouraged to literally starve yourself is fucking stupid. You sound stupid. Being told to eat as a thin person, even if you don't have an ED, might be annoying, might be rude, but it is not even close to the damage done to all people, but in this case fat people, who are told not to eat consistently by society at large, and that not being seen as fucked up or alarming to almost anyone. Those two things are not on the same level. Please stop playing in my face and acting like it is. Yes, you may experience racism, but colorism leaves a specific scar on you, especially as a girl. If you are lighter skinned, you have a proximity to whiteness that I will never have. Therefore, regardless of the racism you experience, which is still bad and horrible, you are experiencing colorism, which means you don't have to deal with certain types of bullshit that I do. Some light-skinned black people will claim reverse colorism because they got called high yellow or white even by other black kids. But that's not a thing because colorism isn't about the equal discrimination between light and dark-skinned people. It is specifically about discrimination against dark-skinned people. Fatphobia and or anti-fat bias are specifically about the systemic discrimination that actual fat people have to deal with. Now, the fatter you are, the more struggles you are going to have. Being fat or being dark-skinned means you will probably get passed over for more jobs than someone thinner and or lighter than you. You might, and in most states, will be paid less. As FD spoke about earlier, you'll deal with more barriers to academic success. Being fat means you might have to look up the seating to a restaurant that your job is having some kind of dinner at to make sure you can fit the seats. That's not something a thin, able-bodied person would have to worry about because they live in a world that is built for them. I think some people feel bad learning that how they look, how they were born, might be benefiting them in some way. It feels like Nepo babies and how some of them who actually did benefit from having a family member in the business refuse to acknowledge how helpful that's been to their career. They feel like they're being told that they didn't get there because of talent, but because of their parents or whoever. Some of them even feel like they experience a certain discrimination because of these judgments. This is reminding me actually of the very dumb and annoying debates around pretty privilege versus ugly privilege that was happening on TikTok a while ago. There was a trend of ugly people coming out to say that they actually have it better than hot people because they don't have to deal with being objectified or harassed. This debate annoyed me because it was just so black and white and one-sided. Pretty privilege to me is very complex because it absolutely does exist and it plays into white supremacy and colorism in a lot of ways. Being conventionally attractive, whether that's being thin, white, or light skinned, you are going to benefit from that, especially if you work in an industry like entertainment. Many people will look at you a certain way. They might find you more trustworthy or more deserving of something. Think about the ways people get angry about a hot person dating someone they think is ugly. People think gorgeous people deserve someone just as gorgeous as them. Even if that gorgeous person is terrible, they deserve better simply because of how they look. With that said, there's also a hatred of conventionally attractive people, especially women. Conventionally attractive women are often reduced to their looks. Their talent and work ethic is dismissed, and unless they're an Amy Adams or an Elizabeth Olsen, women who aren't super outspoken about anything, they will receive an enormous amount of vitriol from people online. Just because that is true, though, doesn't mean ugly people are more privileged. Perpetuating this narrative that it's only hot people who are sexually assaulted is really fucked up and dangerous. We don't exactly live in a world that is ever willing to believe women who claim that they were sexually assaulted, but we especially don't believe women who aren't conventionally attractive who claim those things. Being ugly does not make you exempt from that type of abuse. It actually means you will probably deal with that type of abuse more because you are seen as a victim that no one will believe. Fat women who are raped are told that they should have taken their assault as a compliment. During the Cosby trial, so many black male comedians kept making jokes about his accusers not being rapeable. Because people still subscribe to the "what was she wearing" excuse when it comes to assault, even when they think they're not. And what we don't talk about when we talk about Fat by Harvey Gordon, she talks about the desirability myth, describing a frightening story of an old landlord making unwanted sexual advances toward her. And she challenges the famous notion that rape is not about desire, but about power, saying,
"What drew him to me was that I appeared to be an easy mark, and I was. What drew him to me was that I wouldn't be believed, so I wouldn't say anything, and I didn't. What drew him to me was the endless stream of sayings about fat women, the symphony of sexualized whispers that prepared him for this crescendo of a moment. Better blowjobs and they'll do whatever you want, and try so hard and be so grateful in bed. All softened the ground for what came next. He knew that I was queer and that I had dated straight men, which meant that anything he wanted was something I would enjoy or feign enjoying. What drew him to me was the certainty that I would be sexually pliable, both in partners and acts, a living doll who would never resist. What drew him to me was that my body made me too untrustworthy to be believed, so I would never speak up. It was about sex, and it was about power. It was about desirability, beauty, privilege, and manipulation. From our disparate positions, both of us were well acquainted with a machine that silences fat survivors, even before we speak. That machine is fueled by every joke, every comment, every deeply held belief that fat people cannot be wanted by anyone who isn't settling or somehow pathological in their desire.
You can experience sexual assault or abuse or harassment. We know this, or we say we know this, but who were the most well-known Me Too accusers? Conventionally attractive white women. That may not feel like a privilege, but it is. None of this is meant to take away from your experiences, but colorism is an important aspect of racism to understand. Anti-fat bias is not the same as skinny shaming, and it never will be. Being underweight and overweight are not the same thing because both bodies are treated extremely differently by our society. Constantly denying that reality only helps those who are too sensitive to admit that they have advantages over others. Another one of those advantages is having your experience be the top priority when it comes to discourse around a certain problem. Everyone deserves a space where they can talk about the body shaming and or body image issues they've dealt with, but you don't have to co-opt every space or every conversation that doesn't include you when your inclusion in everyday society is more accepted and normalized. This is why fatphobia is something that I am so passionate about and why it upsets me, because I really do feel like colorism and fatphobia are so similar in how it plays out in the world and how people respond to it. As a dark-skinned black woman who also doesn't have big natural curls, I understand what it's like to be alienated from certain spaces because you don't qualify. And I know the frustration that comes when your space is co-opted by people with more privilege than you. I discussed this in my body positivity video, but so many thin people are intent on just not letting fat people have a goddamn thing. They can't even have a space where they can exist without being told to lose weight or that they're disgusting or how they aren't allowed to be body positive because they're too fat and unhealthy without the thin swooping in, making it all about them and inflicting that exact harm onto them. Even when we're talking about fat shaming, we're not even talking about fat people. We're talking about thin people who are fat shamed. Tyra Banks, Jessica Simpson, Britney Spears. All women I also talked about earlier, and in my I Feel Pretty video, and I even say there that I wish people had the same energy for actual fat people who deal with this shit more often and on a much larger scale. When it comes to thin people, we're way more likely to sympathize with them when they speak about their issues with body image, body shaming, and EDs. But when Lizzo is crying on live on Facebook about being fat shamed and receiving racist and misogynistic hate comments, everyone mocks her, and her defenders insist she cares way too much about what people think of her. Fuck the haters, queen. On a side note, I was talking earlier about the light skin washing of dark-skinned black women characters, and something that I've personally never heard anyone but fat people discuss is skinny washing. Going back to The Color Purple, Celie was written as a fat person in the book. Carrie White from Stephen King's Carrie was supposed to be fat, which would obviously explain the whole pig's blood thing. Like, Carrie being fat is central to why she is bullied so relentlessly at school. There are countless more examples, but again, that's another video. Thin people are catered to a lot when it comes to conversations around body shaming and eating disorders. But because of internalized dominance, something we can all perpetuate, you can't recognize that not everything has to be about you. You can admit that maybe, just maybe, you might just have a slightly easier life because of how you look. I get why that can be uncomfortable to sit with at first, but get over it. It is much more uncomfortable living in a body that is considered hideous and undesirable, and therefore will not be afforded protection or freedom, than it is to feel uncomfortable about being privileged. Acting like that uncomfortability is somehow on par with what people like me or fat people have to experience is indicative of your privilege. As I said earlier with the Bell Hooks quote, everyone knows this, whether they want to admit it or not. People know that dark-skinned black women are largely considered ugly by the world at large. People will know that fat people are discriminated against and will be aware of how them being smaller or lighter or more able-bodied or richer benefits them. When you're at the amusement park and you're in line to get on some roller coaster and you see the fat person being told that they cannot ride this ride because they're too fat, you know. Oh, fat people can't participate in certain activities because they're fat and the seats are too small for them. I can because I'm smaller.
The world don't like dark skinned black women, right? Like in some, I was thinking about this, like the kind of implicit things you're taught to believe about your beauty or yourself as a dark skinned black girl, specifically, I think growing up, with respect to me, like cutting off my hair, because 10 years ago, I want to say almost 10 years ago, like when I first moved to New York, I cut my hair into a pixie cut and panicked immediately. Like, you know what I mean? Full-throated panic. Like, I have to get a wig. This is the most stress, you know what I mean, for the last year. Da, 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 da. And I realized, like, when I think about it, and I look at the cut and I'm like, oh, this was cute. Like, what's the problem? And I know what the problem is. The problem is, like, implicitly, like, as black women, I actually, right before we started recording, I was listening to a YouTube video. I was listening to Breakfast Club, and they were talking about Soulja Boy. B. Simone said, never in my life has anybody been, she was like, Soulja Boy's a legend. He's great, da 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 da. But never in my life has anybody been like, turn that Soulja Boy on. Like, I'm trying to hit that, crank that. You know what I mean? And so Soulja Boy starts going off and saying a bunch of, it's funny,
of course,
to like so much typical anti-black stuff that don't even apply to this light skin gal. You know what I mean? Like, he's like,
just general anti-black shit in your direction.
And he's like fixated on like, oh, bitch, you ain't got no hair because she has a pixie cut by choice, right? Like this thing. And I thought about, and that was something I was thinking about a lot this week, the way like black women, like bald headed is such a go-to thought process excuse, like this, like insult or whatever. Like, even when you have hair, they say that to you, or they think about the way, like in Martin, they would talk about Pam. You talk about Pam Kitchen. Pam had a hair full of long, straight, gorgeous hair, and he'd still make.
I was so confused by that for much of my childhood because I didn't know what a BDB was, because I would look at Pam and be like,
if you are a dark black woman, like sudden, like it is like to inherently be undesirable. Like if they think it's undesirable, it applies to you no matter what it is that they could see, right? And you're made to feel like you have to overcompensate for the fact that the world doesn't think you're pretty. They receive that, even if you don't. Like, it has nothing to do with your own self-esteem. Yep. Like, I think about even how, like, when Shannon Sharp like posted a picture of his daughter one time, dark-skinned beautiful woman woman, but he felt the need to be like, and oh, that's her hair. That's her real hair, that long hair, or whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like the way you feel like black women see it as like a badge of honor to show you have long hair. But in particular, whatever, when you're dark skinned, God forbid, you not be skinny or whatever have you. And I'm like, you know what? That's what it is. Like I realized like 10 years ago, like that's what it is. The pressure and the inherent panic of feeling like, I thought about it like even the need to feel like, to show, like, if you're going to show that you cut your hair or have a pixie cut, the need to feel like, show how long your hair was before that it got cut off.
Absolutely
like, you feel like you have to validate. Think about how many grown black women want to tell you how long their hair was. Like, they always just tell you, oh, it was long. I grew
you. That was so weird.
And it's like, what's that really rooted in, right? And it really speaks to this larger, you know what I mean? These larger beauty standards and these things that are anti-black in a lot of respects or whatever, and it creates this desirability. So
daring to call attention to that and to criticize it means these same people will gaslight you and tell you that what you are experiencing is not true, that you're just asking for people to pity you, or that you're just insecure.
A funny dude, but the drinking
and smart.
Yeah. And then but liquor clouds that. And so he wasn't getting the jokes off and he was feeling away, and then he started just doing light skin jokes, and like at a certain point you're just like you know, I mean, it's not, you hit that punchline, they ain't really rocking with it no more. And
Amanda's hang up about light skin jokes and feeling like she truly needs to be Captain Save-A-Ho of light skinned people and their cause and plight in the landscape of black identity, it's just a really odd position to take.
I think some people don't like me because I'm very light-skinned and they feel I have no place to speak about the black woman experience or about the black experience or to the black experience.
Odd position at best, offensive at worst, and it definitely tips over to the worst side a few times. Amanda, again, Ivy League degree, African American studies, very quizzical take on colorism. We could list a few things, and I will here. She has gone out of her way to publicly dismiss somebody like Wale's claims of colorism against his career, posting to her IG stories, typically taking screenshots of her IG stories and posting it to her timeline. She calls out her followers for making light-skinned jokes.
I mean, think about how wildly inappropriate, disrespectful, shady, and shitty it is when niggas say things like, oh, I don't like dating dark-skinned chicks. That shit is not okay. It is not okay because colorism is a real thing where people with darker skin feel the effects of racism oftentimes in ways that people who are light-skinned may not feel it. That is a real thing. It is also a real thing for light-skinned people to feel marginalized and not as accepted by their darker skinned counterparts because for some reason they think that that privilege that they get is something that they are choosing to get as opposed to that's given to them by a leftover colonial racist structure that seeks to continue to create divisiveness between black people. How about we stop doing that?
And I'm here to say, as a light-skinned person, I do understand how consistent jokes about you being light-skinned and who light-skinned people are can be annoying. But have you read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye? You know, some things you come to realize when you dig into African American studies is that light-skinned jokes don't perpetuate violence or harm. They can be annoying. When you're young and still coming into yourself, it could feel like a little bit of an attack on your blackness. But the way you subvert that, I mean, personally, I just be like, yeah, abolish the light skins. I get it, girl. Abolish us.
Recently, singer Ari Lennox expressed criticism against the famous 90s sitcom Martin for the colorism inherent in the back-and-forth feud between Martin, played by Martin Lawrence, and Pam, played by Tachina Arnold.
Who'll be the hat? Yo, Pam, you should be the dog as usual.
Yeah, Martin, you could be the thimble.
What you need to do is go in the back and straighten out those buckshots in the back of your neck.
A real man wouldn't need any help, Martin.
Well, every man's not built like you, Pam.
When we hung out, we have nothing in common.
Sure we do. We're both built like men.
Of course, some black people, men especially, did what they always do, which is deny, deny, deny. No, it wasn't colorism, because Pam also talked shit about Martin. They roasted each other, and so that cancels out the colorism, of course. Her insults tending to be more creative, and his mostly hinging on her non-existent nappy hair or remarking how she looks like an animal, nothing racially charged about that, of course, are somehow equal and fair game. Tachina Arnold, who also went on to famously play Rochelle in Everybody Hates Chris, apparently wrote many of the jokes for Pam, and so people feel like it was just friendly roasting. She was in on it, so it's fine. It's not colorist. People also say that anyone angry about the treatment of Pam is just insecure. The Martin versus Pam colorism conversation is a perfect example of how something can happen one way and your insecurity you see it as another. Martin literally dated Pam in real life. Like, why is this even a conversation? These are the times. Everything's profitable, even made up victimhood. That part. Man, these people use their insecurities to control others, and others validate their BS by coddling them, pretending they're a victim. I'm sicked. Y'all being willfully obtuse, not gonna lie. Exactly. Revisionist history about the show doesn't benefit the colorism that dark skinned women face present day. Because now we focus on rebuking the silly argument when she could have used her notoriety to curate a conversation on actual colorism. Picking better points would help, to be honest. If the point trying to be made has visibly been proven false, the honest thing to do is find a better way to say the truth. People think going after jokes is the same as going after Jim Crow. LMAO, realer shit has never been said. I keep fighting people on this. Martin was literally the only person in that show that considered her unattractive. Every other man, woman, celebrity guest, and studio audience thought Pam was fine as fuck. And subsequently, everybody ragged on Gina for her big head, being overly emotional, and being bougie. Pam gave it back even harder. Using 2025 sensitivities for anything before 2012 is a dangerous game. I don't know what I missed, but it's too early for my brain to work this morning. Martin would clown Pam, but never made it about color. Wow, I have been reading some interesting threads lately. This thread is fascinating to me. The original post is doing the classic, you just have low self-esteem. You're just insecure defense that you see playing out right now with the racist American Eagle Sydney Sweeney ad. Doja Cat made a video mocking it, and in Entertainment Weekly's YouTube video covering it, the comments are full of people angry about this video while also calling the people angry about a racist ad sensitive. So just remember what I was saying earlier. And they're claiming that Doja Cat, a conventionally attractive biracial woman with big boobs and a big booty, is jealous of Sydney. I'm sorry, but that is hilarious. I promise you, Doja Cat has nothing to be jealous of. She also adheres to conventional beauty standards. What are we talking about? But because Sydney is white and thin and busty, that must be the only reason women of color who, are more likely to be well endowed than a Sydney would criticize and or mock her. That's not to say criticisms never come from insecurity, but usually when people say it in this context, they are using that as a way to make Black women feel like they're just being bitter haters rather than calling attention to an obvious form of discrimination. I don't want to contribute to the bastardization of therapy speak, but it feels like gaslighting. A stupid ad advertising ugly ass jeans for a company whose stock wouldn't have risen without this should tell you something. If you need a eugenics coded advertisement to get people to buy your jeans, that's embarrassing, babes. It's lucrative to be racist, so get that racist bag, I guess. The first comment under that post notes that Martin and Pam dated in real life, as if that also cancels out the colorism. I don't even know for sure if they did date because I don't give a fuck. What the fuck are you talking about? What does that matter? You think someone dating a dark-skinned Black woman means they couldn't possibly be colorist? Two actors dating means any bigotry inherent in the writing of their characters isn't real. Again, I trust that some of these Black people understand that that is an incredibly ignorant way to think about people. But again, when it comes to colorism, people just want to deny it at every turn and give excuses and defenses that don't excuse or defend anything. Many of these people being Black men is not lost on me. Everything is profitable, even made up victimhood. Who is profiting off of talking about colorism? It's not even a fully mainstream conversation because it barely comes up in most conversations around racism. If the people talking about it aren't Black or people of color, I'm pretty much shocked out of my mind when I hear a white person even mention it. All of these commenters whining about people just wanting to be a victim and trying to control people with their insecurities is seriously some of the most aggravating shit I've ever seen in my life. Just because someone is calling out colorism doesn't mean they're trying to control people or profit off of victimhood. People like this cannot handle any conversation that might make them feel a little bad about a stupid sitcom that they say dumb shit like this, knowing it doesn't make any sense. As I was saying earlier, people are very aware of their privilege. People recognize the different ways different kinds of people are treated. It's just some people think that is correct and just in how things are supposed to be. Misogynists understand that double standards exist. The problem isn't that they don't know. The problem is they think those double standards are not only normal, but fine. Women should be slut shamed for having sex, and men should be celebrated for doing the same thing. Of course, fat people are heavily stereotyped and alienated in mainstream media. They're a fact. Of course, they're shown stuffing their faces in ways meant to gross us out. So anyone who has the audacity to express frustration with these stereotypes or jokes or depictions is just insecure. Has low self-esteem that was self-caused, I guess. It comes from nowhere, just your pathetic, deluded brain. Because as I noted earlier, being insecure is not only a character flaw, but it is your fault. It's something that can be easily lobbied at people as a way to dismiss any systemic factors that could have played into this possible insecurity. Say this is simply about insecurity, even though it isn't, but let's say it is. Why is that their fault? If you grew up a dark-skinned Black woman who got called ugly and burnt and mean and monstrous constantly, but not just your own peers, but your own family members, I think being a little sensitive about a dark-skinned Black woman character being treated a certain way in your favorite sitcom is reasonable. I think having jealousy towards people who you have been told are more attractive than you are is understandable and is sadly and most likely to be unavoidable. Internalizing self-hatred about your own race or body or class is part of the function of oppression. Why do you think so many women who are feminists admit to having a phase where they outright hated women and anything targeted towards girls and young women? Why do you think Black Republicans exist? For some reason, though, even if we've done nothing to help this person's self-esteem, we just expect all people to learn to love themselves and their appearance while existing in a sea of bullshit telling you that you're not enough. It is reasonable to have those sensitivities, even if they aren't always completely valid. Why do we act like someone being insecure about how they look is all on them, as we simultaneously make people feel like shit for how they look all the time? The same people criticizing Gen Z for being obsessed with aging are the same people nitpicking Gen Z celebrities' plastic surgery so that they can dunk on them for their appearance and call them old, perpetuating ageism while calling out Gen Z for being ageist. You're not any better than someone who has insecurities about their appearance and constantly putting the responsibility onto that person who has a right to be angry about how they are being treated because of how they look is incredibly dismissive and, as someone commented, willfully obtuse. Martin didn't have to specifically say something about her skin tone for that colorism to come through. Pam very clearly has very long, pretty, straight hair. Where the fuck are you getting nappy from? And what about her is masculine or beastly? She's pretty feminine how she dresses and how she looks. Nothing about her gives mass to me. And that wouldn't be bad if she was more masculine presenting, but he is clearly saying that as a way to strip away her femininity, because that is what people do to dark-skinned Black women all the fucking time. I don't care if Gina's big forehead got made fun of as well. That has nothing to do with her light skin. And no, I don't care if Pam also roasted him back. His insults are pointed, and you know they are. Friendly roasting does not negate the existence of colorism. Fucking dumbass people. It's the same shit with the American Eagle ad. It is clearly racist. And the dumb white Republicans like Megyn Kelly's fuck ass and Piers Morgan's bitch ass acting like they don't understand why people are upset is what people with enormous privilege do all the fucking time. They wouldn't be interested in this controversy if the lefties weren't upset about it, and they absolutely know where that upset is coming from. They're accusing any woman who criticizes the ad of just being jealous of Sydney as if she is the most beautiful woman in the world, and then playing dumb about the clear eugenics coding of the advertisement. Like, sure, Sydney was scripted to say a bunch of shit about genetics for no reason, and them ending the ad with Sydney has great genes was completely unrelated to the words she just said before. For sure. Why would you jump to the conclusion that they're just jealous if you aren't aware of the meaning of the ad's double entendre? You clearly agree with what it is saying, hence why you are all going out and buying a pair of hideous, wrinkly-looking ass jeans just to stick it to people of color. Why is it that whenever Sydney is receiving due criticism, y'all immediately weaponize her against women of color? And why is this constant sentiment of, we're living in Sydney Sweeney land now, we're done with wokified ads being parroted by right-wing shitheads? This is what right Republicans and conservatives do. They do everything out of spite. They play into that deep-rooted fixation on white blonde girlies with blue eyes because they know what that means. As a dark-skinned Black woman, we also understand that from a very young age, and this is something that was beautifully but also tragically portrayed in Toni Morrison's 1970 debut novel, The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye, which takes place in the early 1940s, is about a young girl named Pecola Breedlove, a young Black girl who, along with her parents, is considered very ugly by most people in the town she lives in. She is physically and sexually abused by her parents, one of which is a violent drunk who ends up impregnating her, and the other who struggles with her own self-hatred of her own appearance. The story is partially told from the perspective of Pacola's 9-year-old friend, Claudette, who was also black and has a disdain for white girls. In the beginning of the story, we hear her discussing how much she hates that she was gifted a white baby doll and ends up destroying it. There's a section where both Claudette and her older sister Frida meet a girl named Maureen Peel, a half-white, light-skinned girl who they notice receives preferential treatment from the boys in their class. This book is very dark, but it is also very funny, and the way Claudette talks about how much she cannot stand this girl's guts is so fucking funny. When she was assigned a locker next to mine, I could indulge my fantasy 4 times a day. My sister and I both suspected that we were secretly prepared to be her friend if she would let us. But I knew it would be a dangerous friendship for when my eye traced the white border patterns of those Kelly green knee socks and felt the pull and slack of my brown stockings. I wanted to kick her. And when I thought of the unearned haughtiness in her eyes, I plotted accidental slammings of locker doors on her hand. Like, she's 9 and she already understands why this girl is being treated differently than people who look like her, Pacola, and her friend. And her hatred of her, while a little mean, is again to be expected. You can't just brush that off as pure unjustified bitterness. Pacola is a child who is treated horribly by almost everyone because of how she looks, and this ends up causing her to literally lose her mind. She meets some scammy preacher who likes to molest little girls and begs him to give her blue eyes. He convinces her that he has fulfilled that wish, and the story ends with Pacola now delusional, thinking she has blue eyes. This sadly comes after Pacola's baby died after giving birth to it, and she mistakenly thinks everyone around town is treating her differently because of her eyes, when it's in fact because they feel sorry for her, but not enough to help her or even give her direct eye contact. The last couple of pages we return to Claudette's point of view, where she laments that she, along with everyone else in town, used Pacola as a fall guy for their own egos and perceptions of their own appearance. Tony says she wanted people to understand what it would be like to be Pacola. When I first read this book years ago, I understood exactly how Pacola felt. I was Pacola when I was a child. When you look a certain way, you learn very early on how important and valuable conventional beauty is. And when you know that you exist outside of that convention, depending on whether you receive counter-messaging at home, you might spend years fantasizing about looking like anything but yourself. You're in an environment hell-bent on destroying your self-esteem, only for it to cause you to lose your mind and for everyone to turn the other cheek and act like they don't know how you got there, so they don't have to take any responsibility. Self-hatred, anti-blackness, and colorism run deep. So deep that people are willing to put actual poison on their faces to lighten their skin. Skin whitening creams are a billion-dollar industry in many different countries, and there is so much available information online about how dangerous the ingredients in these products are. Some of them literally contain mercury. Mercury, bitch! You've seen my Dove video. I talked about how Dove is owned by Unilever, which also produces skin whitening creams like Glow & Lovely, which used to be sold as Fair & Lovely. The ads for that cream are just blatant textbook colorism. But using these creams in the long run will do the very thing the person using it would absolutely dread, which is ruin your skin. An NPR article from March of this year talks about the dangers of these creams, and they feature a black woman from Nigeria who was given skin whitening cream without her knowledge by her stepmother when she was 12 years old. It succeeded in actually lightening her skin, and she was elated by the results and the different ways she was being treated by her peers. Within 1 week, I started seeing changes. I started becoming fairer than I was, she says, describing her euphoria at the transformation in her almond brown skin. Not just on her face and hands as her friends used them, but across her body. The newfound attention was instant, from boys who previously paid her little notice. I felt happy. I felt I was looking more beautiful. Why wouldn't she feel this way? As I said, this was gifted to her by a family member, first off. And second, if you grew up dark-skinned in the same way if you grew up a fat person, you were constantly receiving messages from the world that people lighter and thinner than you are factually beautiful, and that you should do everything in your power to get as close to that beauty standard as you can, because if you do, you will be happier. You will be more confident, and your life will change for the better.
Your one day is closer than you think.
One day, I will fit into that dress.
One day, I will play soccer with my son.
One day, I will rock that swimsuit.
People who do things like get plastic surgery or try to alter their appearance in any way are villainized as vain. It's why the nutty professor becomes a huge dick after he gets skinny. He didn't lose the weight the hard way, so he must be punished for being so vain, even though the world wants Sherman to be thinner and treats him like shit for not being thin. There was a ton of discourse around Lil' Kim a few years ago because she was noticeably lighter than she used to be. And people get mad at people like Lil' Kim and not the world that made her feel like she needed to do that. We know Lil' Kim was treated horribly by many of the men in her life during the height of her fame, and we know how pervasive colorism and anti-blackness is in our community. Growing up as a black person, you usually get these messages that black is beautiful, but you also get counter messages telling you that being too black isn't beautiful. There are black people who try to act like body image issues and eating disorders are white people problems, as if our community is so much more accepting and caring and less toxic about body standards towards those of us who don't fit within an acceptable version of blackness, when sadly, we are not. I know colorism stems from white supremacy, but it has almost always been mostly black people who have experienced the worst kinds of colorism from. These white supremacist ideals of beauty, this obsession with blonde hair and blue eyes, is something that is taught to you by your own people along with the world at large. And you know, some of your own people would probably never think that that's what they were doing, which makes it easier for them to not hold themselves accountable for participating in that self-hatred.
Going back to Martin, because that was the response, is that Pam was clapping back at Martin and both of them were going back and forth at it. To try to argue that Martin and Pam going back and forth was a level playing field when Martin is the head of the show. He is the person who the show is wrapped around, and he just so happens to be in a relationship with a lighter character. Like, we cannot remove these things because they mean something. The second fiddle is often a trope that dark-skinned black characters play time and time again. The dark-skinned friend, the other. And that's what Pam was. She was in a relationship with a dark-skinned man. And even if we get into it, we've seen the constant trope of a dark-skinned man and a female character. Going to Dear White People, the show is about the movie, the TV series that was on Netflix was about exploring white people and their things around race. The main character is a light-skinned woman, and her best friend is dark-skinned, who we did not see much of.
Like the one who was being chosen, it was clear that it was the light-skinned woman.
I truly believe that colorism is so prevalent that we do not even consider it because we see it so much, and we have just adopted it. Like, we're just so used to it that we think this is how things are. And I think that's why people are defending this show, because this is how it's always been, and we do not want to change it.
Never the main character, and if they are the main character, it is set up as a joke. The things that Pam said to Martin, calling him short and calling him a cricket and all that, doesn't hit the same because she is a woman. Yes, it's hurtful, but systematically, it's not doing anything. Martin is not talking about not getting opportunities because he's short. He's not talking about these other opportunities. What do we have? Tashina Arnold going and sharing how difficult it was being a dark-skinned black woman in the industry and finding work.
The 80s were very interesting because it was about that light-skin, dark-skin thing. And I remember literally knowing that I was losing out to certain jobs because of my complexion. And it was just something that, was, you just dealt with it. It was, you just, roll it off your back and keep it moving.
We should know at this point that a child's self-esteem and self-image is very fragile. We should know that our words as elders mean things and are capable of destroying how a child will see themselves for the rest of their lives. You might think I'm being hyperbolic by putting it that way, but it's called childhood wounds for a reason. And we shouldn't expect children to just be more confident and to fuck the haters. Maybe it's the haters that need to change. Maybe the world should be kinder, and maybe we could stop hurling insecurity accusations at people and pretend like we don't understand why they feel that way. People will try to make you feel silly if you admit that you don't think you're pretty, and they'll look at you and understand subconsciously why you would feel that way, even if they personally disagree. But they will still sometimes make you feel like a crazy person and that you're just being ridiculous. They'll infantilize you even and pity you like you're a dumb, innocent child. Deshaun L. Harrison, a non-binary, trans, and disabled writer, wrote about this in their amazing book, Belly of the Beast, and proposes a different way that we could and should view insecurity that marginalized people have about their appearances. We are often socialized into believing that if we are insecure, then we are weak, incapable, or ugly, and that all of those things are bad things to be. Many internalize that, especially those who exist furthest on the margins, like the black fat. But what if insecurities are worth embracing, particularly for the black fat? What if insecurities are not a moral failing of the individual, but rather an inadvertent critique of a society that seeks to punish them, and abuse ugly people who dare to name that their perceived flaws are only named as such because of anti-blackness? In many ways, in other words, insecurities are a response to the violences ugly people are forced to endure. And so often the people deemed ugly are fat, black, and trans. People who are positioned outside the scope of desire and are thus faced with hypercriminalization and other violences against their being. Insecure is an adjective. It is a word intended to describe or name a characteristic of a person, place, or thing, otherwise known as a noun. Insecurity is a noun. It is intended to name a state of being, a response to a possibility of danger. While insecure does the job of classifying one's perceived negative feelings about their body and being, insecurity seeks to name the response to having no protection, the response to being harmed. It lights the path to what leads ugly people to feeling unsafe, unconfident, and uncared for. My last point that I wanted to make was the way some Pam defenders speak about her treatment. Something I always heard over the years from people who recognize the hard treatment of Pam, whether they named it colorism or not, feel obligated to comment on how Gina, Pam's light-skinned counterpart and best friend, wasn't even that pretty and that Pam looked way better than her. As much as I do not want to defend this woman in any way, people also do this with Sydney Sweeney. You have cishet men on the left announcing how they don't even think she's that fuckable. As a cishet man, my opinion on a woman's fuckability is incredibly important for some reason. And to be clear, there are a lot of women who also shat on Sydney's appearance, which isn't better, but I do love watching men on the left just be blatantly sexist all the time and not be called out for it. It's so fun. Who gives a flying fuck whether or not you think Sydney Sweeney is fuckable? Why does it matter if Pam looked better than Gina? Like, how is that helping this conversation? How is that adding to this conversation? And what is the goal of announcing that? If she was actually fuckable to you, then would you not criticize her? If Gina was more attractive in your eyes, would that eliminate the colorism that was happening? It's just a pointless and unnecessary thing to say. The only reason people say it is because, as I talked about in my Lena Dunham video, when we don't like someone, we go straight for their looks. Especially when it's a woman, because we know and understand that that is the best way to take a woman down a peg. If a bunch of straight men say that they don't even want to fuck her, then is her sex appeal even real? With Pam and Gina, it feels like people are just pitting women against each other to make some kind of point or to uplift Pam or dark-skinned black women or something. Why do we feel so comfortable just shitting on the appearance of people who society will deem as the more desirable choice? Yes, it's annoying how people who look like this are overwhelmingly represented in the media and receive some preferential treatment, but calling them ugly actually is not helping anyone. It's just being mean. Because if Pam wasn't attractive to them, would they still defend her? Like, what are we saying? When we condemn desirability politics and then invoke parts of it in the same breath, what are we saying and how are we not self-aware enough to notice that? I still think Sydney Sweeney is very pretty and has great boobs, but I also think she's racist and I don't fucking like her, if I'm being frank. I also think on a grand scale, she is a standard-looking thin white woman, and there are tons of actresses in Hollywood who are just as, if not more, well-endowed than she is. I don't need to tear down her appearance to not fuck with her anymore, but I also think it's fine for people to not think she's that hot either. I don't need to call Gina ugly, actually, to uplift Pam and make a point about colorism. That should rub you the wrong way, because it almost always does for me. If you leave this video thinking that I am asserting that conventionally attractive people or people who have proximity to whiteness or thinness aren't allowed to have insecurities about their appearance, you completely missed the point of anything I was saying, and I would behoove you to start the video over. If you leave this video thinking that I am condemning you for wanting to be thinner or lighter or wanting to adhere to the beauty standard, you should also hit rewind. I can give advice, but I'm not really here to help you with your self-esteem or tell you how to love yourself. I am not a therapist, I cannot do that. But what I can say as someone who spent years hating herself and her appearance, learning that all this bullshit stems from white supremacy and that we are conditioned into this myth of desirability did help me start to unpack my own insecurities about how I looked. Knowing that I wasn't crazy for feeling like people my entire life did in fact treat me differently, not just because of my race or gender, but because I'm dark-skinned, made me feel so vindicated. I am in no way implying that I do not benefit from privilege. I also have enormous privileges. I'm able-bodied for one, I have been much larger than this, but I have never been a very fat person, and I have no fucking idea what it is like to be 300 pounds. Even at my biggest, I never experienced not being able to find my size in a clothing store. I've also never really experienced the extent of systemic anti-fatness as other much fatter people have. I am dark-skinned, but there are people who are much darker than me and are even less likely to be seen on TV and deal with way worse colors bullshit than I do. That doesn't take away from what I've experienced because I still deal with bullshit, and knowing other people have it worse than I do does not make me feel entitled to take up a space when other people want to center their own specific forms of oppression. There are cishet men who do this to women all the time. Because we all suffer under patriarchy, instead of just adding to the conversation, they take up the conversation and declare that actually men's issues need to be centered all day, every day. Not everything has to be about you, and doing incredibly hurtful things like downplaying someone's treatment and or feigning ignorance about their situation or gaslighting black women about tired old debates that I thought had already been settled makes you an asshole. You're just being an asshole. You're being shitty and unempathetic, and if you consider yourself to be a progressive or a feminist or someone who cares about body image issues or what have you, I think you should want more for yourself. You should want to be better, because privilege and the treatment they're getting will exist whether you address it or not, and you have to ask yourself, am I going to contribute to this, or am I going to listen to people, unpack my own bullshit, and help fight against it? I, for one, hope you choose the latter.
Product of the environment. Woo! Hallelujah! In fact, black ice didn't land on the road landed on black ice. Woo! Amen!
Okay. Next up, why is America being ruined by black people?